Hello guys, welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and this message, it comes from a translation of a message that I received a couple of days ago. Then I had to ask one of our admins to give us a translation. The translation reads like this. Hello my brother, how are you? Can you please post my story for me as anonymous? I have a story to tell, and I have been keeping this secret from my husband. Back home, I have 2 kids that I had with my ex-husband before we eventually got separated from each other. I got married to my husband at such an early age, and it was partly because of the lack of financial resources in our family. So I dropped out of school. Then I met my ex-husband, who was at that time a taxi driver, and in no time after I had started dating him, I then fell pregnant for him. When I realized that I had fallen pregnant for him, I was scared to tell my mom, so I ran away from home. Then I moved in with my boyfriend. That is when I saw that he was an abusive womanizer. He was always drunk, because the kind of a job that he was doing, some nights he would come back home. Sometimes he would knock off at around 10 p.m. and whenever he would come back home, he would be so drunk, and he was really abusive towards me. Sometimes after hitting me, then he would force that I should sleep with him. And when I saw that this was too much for me to handle, I decided to run away. But we all know what love is like. When we had our first baby, that is when I decided to run away. But then I told myself that let me go and fix my marriage. When I went back to stay with him, I fell pregnant again. That is when I had my second child. But after he kept on beating me, I then saw that he was never going to change, and he was just a womanizer. I then decided to run away from him completely. I ran away, then I went back to my parents' house. That is when I decided to come back to South Africa, because my mom, she was always complaining whenever there was no food in the house. My mom would complain, and the reason why she would be complaining, it was because now I was staying with them. It was me, my mom, my dad, and some of my siblings and my kids. So I thought that if I was going to come to South Africa, then I would find a better opportunity for myself, because I didn't like the way that my mom kept on insulting me whenever there was no food in the house. When I came here to South Africa, I was very fortunate enough to get a job, but the people that I was working for, they were so strict. They didn't allow me to go out a lot, so I stayed for about 2 years without having a boyfriend. The moment that I started working, that is the moment that the relationship between me and my parents became strong. It was as if my parents were so disappointed in me. The only reason why now our relationship was now much better, it was because when month end would come, I would send them some money so that they can buy some groceries. One day, because of boredom, I joined this other WhatsApp dating group, where I then met my husband. We dated for a little while until he managed to convince me to come stay with him, because I knew the kind of people that I was working for. I don't want to break their hearts, because they had treated me very well. So I decided to run away from them without ever saying goodbye, because I didn't even have the guts to sit down with them so that I can explain to them the situation. When I started staying with my boyfriend, who later became my husband, he then got a job in Polokwane. When I was there, that is when I started going to this other church. This church, it was in a location just after Westernburg, close to Greenside. I worshipped there until one day another prophetess, as we were walking from church, she told me that she wanted to visit me at the place where I was staying, me and my boyfriend. and when she came to the place where I was staying so that she can pray for me, and by the time that she left, as I was taking her to the taxis, she said something that really troubled me. As we were walking, she suddenly asked what kind of a job my husband was doing. As me and that prophetess were talking, that is when she told me that with the kind of money that your husband has, are you comfortable enough to live with your husband knowing that he is childless and you have not given him a child? So from that day, I had that fear that my husband was going to get stolen from me if any other woman out there was going to fall pregnant for him first. So I made all efforts to fall pregnant for my husband, but no matter how hard I would try, I'll just fail. One day I went to church, and there were some bishops who had traveled from Venda. They were invited so that they can come and pray for people. After the church service, that is when one of the bishops invited us so that we can visit them at their church in Venda, even though it was the same church. So a lot of us, instead of going to Greenside, we started going to Venda. We were just following after the miracles. There we would go on a Saturday evening, sleep at church, then we would come back on Sunday. So me and one of those prophets in Venda, we started getting along very well, until I told him about all of my problems that I was facing in my marriage. Money was not the problem, but the only problem that I had in my marriage, it was because I was unable to give my husband a child, and he said that he was willing to assist me. Since I was a stay-home wife, on many days, me and that prophet, we would talk for many hours because I had nothing to do. He became more like a friend to me. He also encouraged me to tell him all of my dreams. Like, let's say tonight, if I had a dream and if I dream of something, I was supposed to tell him first thing in the morning. The more me and that prophet became close, the more that I would wish that my husband would quickly get out of the house and go to work, since my husband was someone who was working Sunday to Sunday. The moment that he would get out of the house, I would even feel my heart skipping a beat, just wanting to talk with that prophet. Then there was one Sunday that I had gone to church there in Venda. After the church service, I went to the hiking spot, but as I was standing at that hiking spot, I failed to get a car to stop for me and for it to give me a lift. When I saw that now it was getting dark, I said to myself, let me go and sleep at that prophet's church. But I was afraid to go there because it was almost in the bushes with no building. So I decided to call that prophet and inform him about my situation. He then drove to the hiking spot and he asked me if he could drive me from Venda traveling to Polokwane, and I agreed. When we were in Polokwane, he got me into a taxi, and when I arrived home, I then lied to my husband that I had traveled by taxi from Venda. This is what the prophet had told me to tell my husband, because when he had dropped me at the taxi rank, he said that I cannot drive with you at your place because your husband is not going to understand. So get into the taxi, and once you have reached your place, then tell your husband that you have traveled by taxi from Venda. And this is what I did. That prophet then told me that my husband cannot make a woman fall pregnant because of what his parents did. The prophet told me that my husband's parents married him off to a spiritual wife. At first, I thought that this was just a lie from the pit of hell. When that prophet told me that one day, even if I do not believe him today, but one day my husband will eventually confess to me that his parents have a female tokology, so they married him to a spirit of a dead woman. But eventually, my brother, I had no choice but to believe it, because one day out of nowhere, my husband started confessing. He gave me his life history, and he told me that this was the reason why all of his previous marriages had failed. It is because he is married off to a spiritual wife. after everything that my husband had told me, I then went to that prophet and I gave him the confession that was given to me by my husband. The prophet then told me that we had to pray, and we had to pray a lot. He told me that if I ever wanted to give my husband a child, I was supposed to have intercourse with him, but I refused. And after that, he asked me to buy some items that I was supposed to use for the prayers, but I was not supposed to tell my husband. So I bought those items and I placed them inside my pillow. But after that, I started falling in love with that prophet. So many times he would come to Polokwane and book a guest house along N1, and we would go there and spend a lot of time together. Many times, since my husband was ever working, because the kind of a job that he was doing, it is commission based. So most of the times he was at work. So what I'll do is that whenever my husband would be at work, if it was on a Sunday, then I would lie to my husband that I would have gone to church, but instead I'll get onto the taxi. Then I would go and meet up with that prophet at the guest house where he would be staying. My husband never caught me, but after cheating on my husband, I decided to stop. But because I was afraid of that prophet blackmailing me or my husband, since he knew that my husband had a lot of money, because at the time when I was dating that prophet, I was the one who was even taking care of him. There is a house that he built. I actually assisted him with a lot of building materials, because there was a time when he told me that he wanted to open up some doors for my husband so that he can get a lot of customers. And yes, my husband was then promoted because he was now able to bring in a lot of money into the company. And when I saw that, I didn't want to keep on cheating with that prophet in fear of him blackmailing me or my husband. I then convinced my husband that we had to move out of Polokwane. So my husband applied so that he can go and work at another branch, but in the same company. And when his application was approved, that is when he agreed. But my husband didn't have any single idea as to why I had forced him to move out of Polokwane. In the following months, after we had moved out of Polokwane, I then found that I was pregnant. But I know that this child, it does not belong to that prophet that I was cheating with. But I know that this child, it belongs to my current husband. After sleeping with that prophet, I went on my periods, meaning that I was not pregnant at the time when I broke up with that prophet. So the child that I had, I know that it belongs to my husband. But this secret that I am keeping in my heart, I can't even mention it to my husband because I am afraid of his reaction. Dear listeners, right there was a message that I received from Anonymous a couple of days ago. Then I had to ask one of our admins to give us a translation of that message.